Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene per year, here alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
Always great to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear every week. I'm just happy to hear that because it would really be destabilizing for our show if that was not the case.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, thanks everyone to joining us. Very, very happy to have you here with us, of course, and some of you are watching on YouTube. So I want to remind those of you watching on YouTube to make sure that you hit the subscribe button and then also make sure you hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to. So that way you don't have to look very far for all the excellent content coming out here on a daily basis from Breakthrough News, including dispatches with Rania Khalek. And of course, some of you are also watching here on Free Speech TV. So just want to give a shout out to you. You don't have to do anything, just keep watching. But big shout out, as always, to the whole Free Speech TV team for making it possible for us to appear here on your television screen. Rania, are there other things as we get the show started that you would like our viewers to keep in mind?
Yes, Eugene, as always, I want to remind everybody that they can help support Breakthrough News and keep us going and growing by becoming a member of Breakthrough News. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And for as little as $5 a month, you can help support our programs as well as get access to exclusive content, including this very cool mug, which says Breakthrough News on it and has our very awesome logo. I love this mug. But more importantly, in a time when we're just flooded with a tsunami of pro-war propaganda, pro-genocide propaganda, it's more important than ever that you help support independent media. So you can become a part of that by becoming a Breakthrough News member if you are able to. It makes all the difference. I mean, we have so many subscribers, Eugene. If we could get everybody to just give us a couple dollars, imagine what we could do. I mean, with the small team we have, we're already doing a lot. We could do even more.
Yeah, no, I mean, 800,000 some odd subscribers here on YouTube. So everyone gave just $1, it would be $800,000, a month if you gave that a month. And then, of course, what that adds up to in a year, I don't really know. I don't do math. But as you can see, a large number of people making modest donations can actually have a massive impact. So if you think, I can only give some small amount of money and that's not worth anything, I'm telling you, you are in fact wrong. Anything you can give on an ongoing, consistent, month-to-month basis can make a huge difference. And if you can convince 2 or 3 other people, 5 or 10 other people, it makes an even bigger difference. So don't count yourself out. It's a tough world out there. A lot of folks are struggling, and that $2, that $3, that $4, that $5, it really actually does make a huge difference and mean a lot to us. So big shout out to everyone who's already a patron, everyone who's about to become a patron, and everyone who is finding all other ways to support our work, passing it around, sharing it, all the other pieces. And, this would be a good time for me to also remind you that you should let folks know that we are here and the Freedom Side is going on, getting ready to start. We've got great content for you here, as we always do, going around the world from the United States, of course, South Africa. We're going to be having an eyewitness report from doctors who were in Gaza from the I don't even know what the words are to describe the situation there in terms of the collapse of the healthcare system. We're going to be talking about the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer here in the United States. So we've got all sorts of things for you around the world and back again. So whatever feels right to you, if you want to send a text, make a phone call, knock on a neighbor's door, air horn out the window, carrier pigeon, Skywriter, whatever seems right in this moment to let people know that we're here.
Skywriter, could you imagine? No, but I'd be pretty blown away if somebody did a skywrite to be like, turn on Breakthrough News on YouTube.
Well, listen,
subscribe, become a patron.
Beach weather is happening now, so up and down the East Coast. I don't know if they do this on the West Coast, but when I used to go to Virginia Beach, people are always doing random skywriting and also the little planes with the banners behind them. So if anyone wants to do that for us here on the Freedom Side or Breakthrough News generally,
we're down.
Now is
Or
the
like
time.
one of those boats, you know how there's always like a boat going in the back, like at the beach, a boat going by, like advertising something. We could
I
do
do.
breakthrough. Sorry, now I'm just getting too in the weeds here. I
You-
also, before we move on to our first guest, I do want to
Yes.
remind people to also make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Music
Does
to my
indeed.
ears.
Yeah. Music to someone's ears. Nonetheless, just being honest.
Wow.
Yep. Nonetheless, now that we've gotten that out of the way, why don't we go ahead and move forward here to something that some of you may be somewhat aware of, because in the United States, we had a federal holiday yesterday. I'm sure some people had the day off. It was the federal holiday for Juneteenth, which is a very new federal holiday, although it's been celebrated for many, many years. A lot to it, a lot of very relevant history, and a lot of different pieces branching off from that history. And we are very, very honored to be joined here as we continue the show by Dr. Gerald Horne, who's a professor of history and African American studies at the University of Houston. Dr. Horne, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks so much for being here as always. And, in a way I wish everyone did know, but I assume a lot of people don't know. So when we talk about Juneteenth, I mean, what is really being celebrated here? How did Juneteenth become a holiday such as it is now that has been celebrated for so many years by African Americans and now at least ostensibly by the whole country?
Well, first of all, let me say that like most sane people, I support the concept of Juneteenth, despite the fact that the official narrative around Juneteenth is misleading at best. The official narrative is that on June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger showed up in order to apprise the Black folk in Galveston who had been enslaved that, don't you folks know you were free? That is to say, pursuant to Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863. But that's misleading because, as I'm sure you and your audience know, the Emancipation Proclamation applied precisely to those states where the Lincoln administration had no jurisdiction. It certainly had no jurisdiction in Texas. Texas was in rebellion against the United States of America. And that is the actual reality. So what happened, in fact, was that General Granger showed up in order to enforce the end of the U.S. Civil War from the barrel of a gun, because the enslaving class had this diabolical scheme to continue slavery. How so, you ask? Well, recall that during the midst of the U.S. Civil War, the French, under the leadership of their puppet, Maximilian, had taken over Mexico. That is the root of the holiday we mark Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, which marks a victory of progressive Mexicans over French occupation forces. And so the idea of the enslaving class in Texas was to move en masse to Mexico and or collaborate with the puppet regime in Mexico to ensure enslavement of Africans on this side of the border. What happens, of course, is that that plan does not succeed, not least because there was an uprising in Mexico against the French puppet leader, Maximilian, assisted, I'm happy to say, by Black men in blue, that is to say, Black members of the US forces, who execute a kind of pincers movement against the occupation forces, which leads to June 19th, 1867, when the French leader Maximilian is captured and executed. And I dare say that that second Juneteenth, June 19th, 1867, brought the United States and brought Texas in particular closer to abolition of enslavement than the original Juneteenth, 1865, which we marked and celebrated yesterday.
Wow. And I mean, it's not exactly talked about like that when we talk about Juneteenth today, obviously. But, there is this I guess we could call it like right-wing backlash to having this holiday, which turns into this partisan issue of Republican versus Democrat. I'm curious when we talk about the backlash to having a holiday like Juneteenth. I want to take it outside of the partisan issue and ask you to maybe put it in the context of the constant reaction or reactionary view to the idea of even recognizing the immense crime of slavery, and the fact that after slavery was abolished, which is what you're an expert on, there was a counter-revolution, if you will, to try to prevent emancipation, like a real kind of emancipation, from taking place. I guess I'm asking if you could kind of thread that behavior, that sort of counter-revolution, to the attitude we see today towards, people antagonizing the idea of Juneteenth.
Well, I think we're in the midst, sad to say, of another counter-revolutionary moment. That's the import of book bannings in high school libraries. That's the import of school principals in a state like Texas being driven out of office. That's the import of the fact that in Texas and Florida, there has been an attempt to deem illegitimate the 1619 Project of Howard University professor Nicole Hannah-Jones, not least because it put forward the apparent seditious notion that when the settlers in 1776 revolted against British rule, that had something to do with enslavement of Africans. I think part of the contradiction is that on the one hand, as we will ascertain on July 4th, there is a celebration across class and ideological lines in the United States of 1776, of the founding of the United States, despite the fact that the state was founded and was led for decades by enslavers. And then, of course, we're trying to carry in our minds the companion notion that slavery was a crime against humanity, slavery was somehow illegitimate. But that's a difficult circle to square. On the one hand, celebrating the handiwork of enslavers in 1776, and on the other hand, saying that enslavement itself was a crime against humanity. And so as a result of that contradiction, you see the ground prepared for this backlash against telling the true story of slavery. You see what's happening in Florida, where there have been attempts to teach in high school the idea that there are positive aspects to slavery. Supposedly people learned skills, believe it or not. But once again, this stems from this fundamental contradiction about the origins and founding of the past slaveholders' republic.
Well, and to extend that point a little bit further, and just in sort of thinking about Texas in the center of this, when we talk about the current sort of right-wing backlash, and we also, think about the history of the Confederacy, even the foundation of Texas, it's interesting when we look at, and I'm curious your thoughts about this in the broader sort of American body politic, if you will. It does seem like Texas, not to slight anyone from Texas, but that it does seem to play something of an outsized role in both the formation and the continuity around the far-right trend in American society.
Oh, absolutely. And feel free, from my point of view, to slight the Lone Star State because it deserves it. I've oftentimes argued, in fact, I did argue in my book, The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and the Roots of U.S. Fascism, that Texas is to the United States as the United States is to the world. That is to say, just as the United States drags the international community to the right, Texas drives the United States to the right. And we also know that when Texas seceded from Mexico in 1836 and set up an independent republic, that a motive force for this was precisely the fact that Mexico, under a leader of African descent, centuries before Barack Obama, had executed the abolition of enslavement. And those like Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin, who were enslavers and then named ostentatiously leading Texas cities after themselves, were not having it. They rebelled, set up an independent republic, which became a competitor to a certain degree of the United States of America in terms of enslaving Africans. The Lone Star flag could be found off the coast of Angola, off the coast of Brazil, off the coast of Cuba. And then during the U.S. Civil War, Texas was the state least damaged by the incursions of the Lincoln Army, not least because it bordered an independent state, speaking of Mexico, under French occupation, and therefore was supplied amply, with many of those supplies then transshipped to neighboring states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, to keep them afloat. So in some ways, Texas is continuing that inglorious legacy of being a major anchor of reactionary politics, both domestically and globally.
You know, Gerald, as we approach July 4th, which you brought up a bit earlier, and you talked about the contradiction across the ideological spectrum, like you said, you have the celebration of July 4th and this genuine belief, because that's what we're taught in the U.S., that America is like this amazing democracy. You know, it's like sort of the leader of the democratic world. It's the first democracy in the world. But when you look at the founding of the U.S., not even to mention, you know, the genocide of the native people in North America, but you add to it the enslavement, the literal kidnapping of people from a continent of Africa brought to the U.S., forced to labor, forced to basically like give up their children to become slaves to other people, hunted down if they escaped. That doesn't sound very democratic to me. It actually sounds very fascist to me. I'm just curious, would you qualify the U.S. as a fascist state in its founding? I just don't see how it can really be seen as anything else if there's people who are literally in bondage.
Well, that's the import of my aforementioned book, which carries the subtitle Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. But I'm happy to report, to lift the gloom and doom, that there is an increasing split and schism in the historical guild. You have a number of historians who are revisiting the origin of the United States of America. I'm thinking of the late Tyler Stovall of UC Berkeley. I'm thinking of the late philosopher Charles Mills and his book, Racial Contract. I'm thinking of the Haitian-born filmmaker Raoul Peck and his stirring documentary, Exterminate All the Brutes. Even Pulitzer Prize winners like Alan Taylor of the University of Virginia are moving slowly but surely in that direction. Part of the problem is that some of this historiography has escaped the attention of our friends on the left, who tend to latch on to the old-time religion of Thomas Jefferson being the epitome of democracy, despite the fact that he was an enslaver, despite the fact that he wanted to rid North America of all free Negroes. And that leads to what I consider to be these kinds of contradictions, where there's not sufficiently aggressive pushback against, for example, these measures coming out of states like Texas and Florida to circumscribe the teaching of Black history, because at root, I'm afraid to say that some of our friends on the left actually agree with the right. And as long as that is the case, we'll certainly be in trouble.
No, I think it's a well-taken point. I remember Cornel West's response to the DeSantis situation was that he also loves the classics. So, yeah, confusion abounding all around on that front. And you know, I think this is an interesting issue that I also want your thoughts on in this sense of, you know, the role of commemorations like Juneteenth in historical memory, because I think some people see, okay, well, you know, all these holidays become so corporate. They become, you know, the Pentagon is celebrating them. I think some people often ask, do we lose as much as we gain when these holidays, Martin Luther King Day, Juneteenth, are institutionalized?
Well, I understand the sentiment, and I'm sympathetic to the sentiment. But my overriding issue is that when you have a paid holiday for the working class, this is a step towards redistribution of the wealth. This is a blow against the employer class. It is a gift from the descendants of the unpaid sector of the working class, speaking of those we refer to as the enslaved, to the working class as a whole. And that is the context in which we should mark Juneteenth, which we should celebrate Juneteenth. And that's why I think Juneteenth and the establishment of it as a federal holiday has been a step forward for the entire working class.
No. Well, well, if I can get myself together here, I certainly agree. I was happy to have the day off, as it were. But as always, Dr. Horn, we really appreciate you coming on and helping us sort through all of this. And I couldn't recommend more highly The Counter-Revolution of 1836. All of your books I can recommend highly, but I really, really enjoyed that text. But thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you for inviting me.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I think it's really important that we correct is the right word, correct that history that we grew up learning as, you and I being Virginians.
Debatably.
About the founding of the U.S. It's just crazy how we're like, on top of having to say the Pledge of Allegiance every day, we're really inculcated with this belief that this country was somehow founded as a democracy when people were brought over in chains and forced to work.
Yeah. Well, I am from the same
really
town
crazy,
as Thomas Jefferson, He and I share the same hometown. So yeah, I've heard quite a bit of that. If you go to Monticello now, they've gone to great lengths to try to, recreate the African American history element of, slaves and others that were there. But when I was growing up, people would say, the docents in some cases, that slaves were happy there at Monticello. So things have come a long way. There's a good book by my friend Henry's father, also named Henry Winsek. I think it's called Master of the Mountain, but Henry Winsek, pretty rare name. If you just Google Henry Winsek, Thomas Jefferson, amazing, amazing book about the true Jefferson, his attitude towards everyone and everything on so many different levels, but especially towards slavery, towards race, all these different pieces. And I'll just close on this note. They actually just found Sally Hemings' room in Monticello. The people who work there, they excavated it or whatever. I don't know, maybe they didn't knew there. They just revealed it. I don't know if they had found it before. But anyway, the history is like, oh, they were in love, this, that, and the third. Well, she was living in like a basement cellar room that you could only enter or leave by going through his room. So, that sounds a little bit more like
she was a
kidnapping.
Slave who didn't have a choice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. Yeah. It really is unbelievable.
In popular culture, the idea that this was some like romantic love story when he was her owner because she was literally like a person who was owned by somebody else. Not to mention the fact that Thomas Jefferson, upon his death, did he not free his children? Like because he had so many. Yeah,
he didn't. He actually made a lot of promises about individual slaves he would free, and they were not freed. For a lot of reasons. I mean, he didn't free people he said he was going to free, but he was so bad as a business person. He was so deep in debt that his family went back on pretty much all of I think there was a couple people who they freed, but by and large, they went back on him to sell these slaves so that they could try to get out from under the debts that he had left for them because he was extraordinarily poor at the business side of things. So, so many myths that have grown up around.
Founding father. What a guy. Yeah,
I know. Well, James Monroe and James Madison also from Charlottesville. So I'm really right in the triangle of death there in terms of historical memory.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
That's the whole state of Virginia. So what can you do? Nonetheless, we're going to move forward on
Jefferson Davis Highway.
Oh, yeah.
Jefferson Davis Highway in Virginia.
Listen,
Jefferson Davis High School.
Everything.
Yeah. Wow.
I know. I know a middle school in Hampton Roads. It's all black people basically, and it's Jefferson Davis Middle School. So,
painful.
There you go.
Oh, wow.
Jeb Stewart, all of that. Anyway, we won't even go into that, or we'll save it for another time. Maybe on July 4th we'll do a show that really talks more about the true history of Confederate memory in America, which is a really interesting story. The guy who wrote Lies, My Teacher, told me did a great book about that. Anyway, let's move on from there.
Such a good book.
Yeah, great book, and his book about Confederate monuments memory is like fantastic. But anyway, let's move forward to another critically important issue, and that is the aftermath of the elections in South Africa. Yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in for another term of president at the head, this time, of a government of national unity. A lot of different pieces, a lot of different threads to pull on here, and we are very honored to be joined once again by Phakamile Hlubi Majola, who is the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. Pax, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's wonderful to be on the show again. Hope you can hear me.
We can hear you well. It's wonderful to have you on the show again. I wish we were in slightly better circumstances, but where you are there in South Africa, A new government of sorts has been formed between a number of different parties. And we talked just before the election about the rise of the right wing in South Africa. And I kind of want to start in that context because it feels like some of what you and Numsa and others were warning about, that the country could move significantly to the right in the upcoming months, seems to be coming true here with this government of national unity. But explain to us, what is this GNU and what does it mean for South Africa?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It is always a pleasure to be on Breakthrough News. It's always great to engage with you guys. So where we are as a country in South Africa is that, yes, we have had the elections on May 29th, and the governing party, the ANC, which historically was a party of the liberation movement. And I think you and I have had conversations about this in terms of its history, etc., and how it rose to power. The governing party only managed to secure 40% of the vote. So it really has experienced staggering losses in this elections. It is no longer a dominant party. It needed to have a minimum of 50% plus one in order to be considered, the dominant party and to form a government on its own as a bloc. But it has gone below that and now has to haggle with other political parties in order to govern. So yes, it still has quite a significant share. It has 40%. The other party the next party that sort of that performed second in this race was the Democratic Alliance, which is a right-wing organization. It secured 20% of the vote. And then you had the EFF, which secured about 9.5% of the vote, and the MK party, which secured about 11% of the vote. So now the options that were left for the ANC was that the ANC would have, in order for it to secure 50%, it needs to go into a coalition government with one of these political formations that I've just mentioned to you. Now, what it did is instead of going into a coalition with a political formation like the Economic Freedom Fighters or even the MK party, it took a decision to announce what it called a government of national unity, which in our view, as NUMSA, we view this as a way for it to sort of go into a coalition with the right-wing DA without coming out straight and saying, hey guys, we're going into a coalition with the right-wing DA, because it doesn't want to be explicit about saying that, because that would alienate a lot of the alliance partners. As you know, the ANC is a party that has alliances with Labour in the form of COSATU, which is the biggest trade union federation in South Africa, and it has an alliance with the South African Communist Party. Both those two formations made it clear it wouldn't support an alliance of the ANC going to power with the DA. But this GNU that I've just described to you is made up of the DA, the ANC, and another political formation called the IFP. And by the ANC choosing, as I said, not to go into an alliance with a more sort of leftist, leaning parties like the EFF and MK, sends a message to everybody that this ANC is most likely going to be adopting very right-wing policies, because in order for it to actually, get things going in government, it will need the support of the right-wing Democratic Alliance, which has, which is the other party that gained quite a big part of the vote.
Well, that's very, very upsetting to hear. And I'm curious if you can elaborate a bit on what's at stake here. When you talk about this, meaning that the ANC of now will likely be compromising on certain policies, moving to the right on them, what kinds of policies are you referring to here?
So, Rania, one of the things that we're very worried about, which NUMSA has already outlined, is our very, very deep concern around the fact that when you look at the policies of the Democratic Alliance, and the Democratic Alliance, by the way, is very vociferous in pushing its agenda. It doesn't hide what it is and what it represents. In terms of foreign policy, the Democratic Alliance, for example, supports Zionism and supports apartheid Israel. It does not recognize that there is a genocide happening in Gaza. It believes that Israel has the right to defend itself. So already you have a very serious problem from a foreign policy perspective when you look at all the work that the South African government has done in relation to raising the flag of Palestinian people, the battles that it has fought at the ICJ, etc. Secondly, where there is a major contradiction is on the issue of things like the national minimum wage, which is obviously a policy that allows workers in South Africa to earn a minimum wage. The Democratic Alliance is very much opposed to the national minimum wage. It believes in rampant exploitation of labor. The DA does not like South Africa's labor legislations, our labor regulations. It feels that South Africa's labor regulations go too far in protecting worker rights. It would like to see a loosening of labor regulations and a flexible labor market. And I know when you hear these phrases, flexible labor market, you know what it means. It's a dog whistle for rampant exploitation of workers. It means that you pay workers what you want to pay them if you're an owner of a company. You expose them to all manner of shocking conditions. You deny them any basic benefits, all in the name of defending the markets. This is what the DA is about. The Democratic Alliance is also very opposed to policies of redress, policies like affirmative action and employment equity. These are policies that the South African government implemented as a way to sort of make up for the horrible inequalities that apartheid created in the workplace. If you look at, for example, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which represents, all of South African corporations, there is not a single 100% black-owned company in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange 30 years after the end of apartheid. So that tells you a lot about how little transformation has taken place in terms of the owners of the South African economy. So the DA represents the interests of white capital, those who are the billionaire class. And so as a trade union, we are concerned that this GNU is nothing more than a cover for the reactionaries within the ANC to continue to drive and to deepen austerity and to deepen the neoliberal economics.
Well, and on that note, you recently had an op-ed in The Independent that I think spoke to this issue that perhaps we shouldn't give up all hope despite the negative parliamentary matrix, as it were. And you were discussing how workers themselves have a lot of agency to determine what the outcome of the future of South Africa is, workers and workers' organizations. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that as well as we look at sort of a gloomy scenario as it concerns Parliament proper.
Well, yes, I think it is very easy to get depressed. I'll be honest. I was very upset when I was watching the election result. Not so much because of the performance of the ANC. I think the poor performance of the ANC, many of us expected. In fact, NUMSA has been predicting for a long time that the ANC would actually continue to lose massive electoral support because they just simply refused to implement more radical policies that would win over the working class majority. And if they had done so, they could have actually prevented this outcome. So it is unfortunate that the ANC created the conditions for their removal, However, the working class, this is an opportunity in my view. It's an opportunity for the working class to flex its muscle. The working class of South Africa is the one that brought down apartheid. And we should never, ever forget that. And just because we now have a very opportunistic right-wing organization called the Democratic Alliance that is pretty much bullying everyone and trying to impose itself on everyone, doesn't mean that we need to sit back, fold our arms, and tolerate the abuse. We have real agency. We have power. And the power that we have is labor. We have the power, for example, if we're united, to shut down the economy. And I think it's time for labor unions and progressive working class formations to unite around a common agenda, to unite around common demands. By far, the majority of South Africans do not support apartheid Israel. Okay, so that is already something that we can coalesce around. We can coalesce around workers' rights and guaranteeing and securing worker protections. We can coalesce around advancing and even undoing the impact of apartheid. We can coalesce around, basically stopping this neoliberal agenda and really trying to push for a more progressive working class agenda. So really, if it's not just the working class that can lead this, but it does call upon even those formations that are in parliament right now. You have the EFF with its 9.5%. You have the MK party, which has 14%. I was wrong earlier. I said 11%. MK actually secured 14%. These parties can come together with other progressive formations in parliament, working together with Labour to drive a pro-working class agenda. And we don't have to be bullied by the elites in the DA and succumb to their racism and their reactionary ideology. So I do think that this scenario doesn't stop us from pushing back so that we can defend our gains and preserve the progress that we've made in the last 30 years and ensure that going forward we empower the next generation so that this scenario must never ever happen again. We should never allow the defenders of apartheid to find a voice in this country through the Democratic Alliance and other like-minded organizations after we fought so hard to remove apartheid in the first place.
Mm-hmm. No, well taken points all around. And as always, we really, really appreciate you joining us to help us sort through it all. Pakamile Hlubi Majola, the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, or NUMSA, South Africa's largest union. Thank you so much, as always, for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, guys. And just so you know, some of what I've been discussing, especially around the Democratic Alliance, it's a moving target. As I speak to you now, there seems to be a little bit of disagreement between the DA and the ANC, which some of us are celebrating. So, perhaps in 2 weeks, things might be different. But we really do have a role to play as progressives and as the working class. It's not too late. We don't have to go down this right-wing road. There is still a lot that we can do to pull back against the rise of the right wing in this country.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, she is wonderful. Always love having her on to come break everything down, and definitely an unfortunate outcome. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, just so many elections around the world, by the way. So not to take it off of South Africa, but there's supposed to be like more elections than ever this year. So I'm glad that we're able to cover them country by country here on Breakthrough News.
Yeah, I think something like half the world's population is voting this year in some form of national election. I actually don't even think that includes the European elections. Maybe it does. But nonetheless, huge year for elections, and a lot of different outcomes and a few more elections to come, including one right here in the United States of America. So it ain't over yet. Electoral mania, as it were. A few others on different places, including, since we talked about July 4th, the United Kingdom, which is getting ready to have an election on July 4th. We'll have to talk about that soon, but it looks like a historic loss for the Conservative Party. The Tories may destroy the party. Interesting piece, but I don't want to get too far afield here on the United Kingdom or the U.S. elections. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that as the weeks wear on. Now we want to talk about something that is very, very important, critically important, I would say, and that are some important wins being won by workers at Waffle House here in the United States, showing that when you fight, you can win. And to discuss all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Naomi Harris, who's a former Waffle House server and a co-founding member of the Union of Southern Service Workers. Naomi, how you doing? Thanks for being with us.
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you guys?
We're doing well. We're much better now that you are here. Very happy to have you. An honor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So let's just start here for maybe those who haven't heard. Update us on what Waffle House workers were able to win from the company after, some time here of campaigning on the job.
Okay, so my store was the very first store to go on strike at Waffle House in the history of Waffle House. Waffle House hasn't changed the pay in over 30 years, and now that we have started organizing Waffle House, he was forced to give us raises, which is an amazing big win for us. We won a 300% increase. People who have been working for Waffle House for years on end, they are getting what they're calling a 10-year raise, which is amazing for them, which means that basically they get a seniority raise. The CNO says he's going to increase prices, but they're a billion-dollar company. So the fact that they're going to increase their food prices to try and give us our raises is kind of absurd to me. Inflation, it has been happening, and the Waffle House prices has been raised very highly, and they haven't changed none of that in over 30 years. Waffle House has been running for like 68 years, and this is the single largest investment in all of those years from them giving us raises. And we are extremely proud and happy that they are giving us these raises. And it's only because we spoke out, we went on strike, we put them on the front line, and all of the Waffle House workers that saw it started coming out and speaking out against Waffle House. And so our Waffle House campaign has just grown so much larger since almost a year ago. And it's an amazing thing that all the Waffle House workers are starting to come out. They want to do a new system where it's based on their hourly rate per stay, the 10-year, and then the shift premium, which is the third shift raises, because third shift is the longest shift that you have at Waffle House because it's from 9 p.m. all the way until 7 a.m. And so, yeah, and it's a win for all of us, because if it wasn't for us coming out and going on strike almost a year ago next month, then none of this would have came about. Nobody would have came out to speak against Waffle House, because everybody's been scared to speak up against Waffle House because it's the South's delicacy. So speaking up against something that's a delicacy to the South is kind of hard to do. And we get some pushback from people that's been working for Waffle House for like umpteen years. But once they've seen us go out on strike, they have been slowly coming back onto our sides and seeing, okay, now y'all got us a raise. Maybe y'all actually are making Waffle House better. But we still need security. We still need that 24/7 security, because Waffle House is not safe. They tried to implement this to-go process at Waffle Houses now, but that's not going to stop somebody from shooting up it's not going to stop somebody from shooting up a Waffle House. The to-go windows don't do anything for safety. So we still need that safety, and we still need those meal deduction policies to either be opted in and opted out, or to be get rid of altogether. Because it doesn't make sense that they charge us almost $4 an hour to eat food that we don't eat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had wanted to ask you to speak a bit now. I mean, this is very, very exciting. It's huge. At the same time, there are still things to fight for here. You mentioned security. You mentioned the $4 to pay for food. So I'm curious, now that there's been so much organization around this, and now that there has been a victory, what happens next to try to secure further improvements to working conditions at Waffle House?
We're going to keep fighting. The fight is not over. Even though I don't work there anymore, I am going to continue to keep fighting for all Waffle House workers, because Waffle House workers go through so much, and some people think it's a joke what we go through, and it's not a joke. And this is like literally our lives are on the line at Waffle House. So us not having that security is very what's the word I'm looking for? It's dumb, because we need that security. We should not just have security for like 5 hours on third shift only, when stuff happens all day. I went through something at 7:30 in the morning. A guy was upset about hash browns, and he almost took my life over hash browns. So like things like that. If I had security at that moment, I would have never had to deal with no type of confrontation like that. Versus when there's security there, security deals with that. Security knows how to handle that. I'm not trained to handle confrontation like that. And they have a policy where if we fight back, we get fired. So who's supposed to protect me? Am I supposed to just let it happen? I'm not going to just let something happen to me. And I refuse to think it's either my life or my job. I should not be in a circle. I shouldn't be in the middle of picking those two. I should have a security officer there that's trained to do that, to protect me and have my back, versus me having to defend for myself or other customers trying to defend us.
No,
And then that meal deduction policy that they have is so absurd, because it's like $3 and some change, almost $4 that they take out of our checks every time that we work. So if you do a double, that's 2 meal deduction credits that come out of your check. And they don't even make sure that when we go home, we have food to eat in our own refrigerators. And half the time, we don't even eat all of that food. Not even half the time. 95% of the time, we do not eat that food because we do not have time to eat it. We don't have time to eat. And it comes out whether we eat or not. So you're telling me, even though I did not eat this food, I'm still paying for it? What am I paying for? The air? Because I didn't eat. I barely had time to get a sip of water. The shifts are always so packed. The stores are always so packed. It's hard to even sit down and get off your feet for a second and catch your breath. Like, and you're trying to take money out of my check for that? That's not right. So either give us an option to opt in and opt out, or have the managers come up with a system where they keep track of who ate and who did not eat and only charge those people, or just get rid of it altogether. And then if we want to take our food to go, we have to pay for it full price. And they have a 20% tax on it now. So you have to pay for the to-go items. So like, that's the container, that's the cup, that's the straws, anything that's plastic that you have to put the food in, you got to pay for that on top of paying the already 10% tax that comes along with it. So it's like, either y'all give us an option to opt in and opt out, or you just get rid of it altogether, because it doesn't even make sense to have that when we don't even have time to eat the food and we cannot even take it home.
I mean, wow, that I'm honestly just a little shocked. Like, that's crazy. Like, I mean, that's you paying them basically. It's really unbelievable. And I wonder about this too, because I saw that when the AP did an article on it, Waffle House actually just said no comment as to this is what's happening. So it shows, obviously, I think, were afraid to admit about the power of your organizing. But I say that just to ask, what do you think this means for low-wage workers in general across the South? Because Waffle House is so iconic, and everyone knows Waffle House. So to have a win like this, what does that mean for the people working at the places that are lesser known, the gas stations, the local food places? How do you think this impacts those workers as well?
Well, when they see our big win, they can see that they can get it done at their store too. All it takes is one person to speak up and get all the rest of their coworkers on board. That's all it takes. All it takes is just one store for everything to just have a domino effect to it. Your voices will get heard. Always. If you join the Union of Southern Service Workers, your voice will get heard. We will make sure that your job is held accountable for the actions that they do. We hold every single job accountable. That's why we cross-sector organize. So that way we can protect workers no matter where they go to, whether it's a restaurant, to a warehouse, to being a server, to working at a gas station, to healthcare. If you are providing a service in this here South, we are here for you. And we will make sure that your voice gets heard.
And I'm curious, as this continues, I just want to know, in terms of a victory like this, I think it's always important to recognize that workers in one place winning something this big is good for all workers. So how might this benefit workers across the region, across the country?
It can benefit all workers because we're all fighting the same fight. It doesn't matter if I'm working at Waffle House and you're working at a warehouse. We are going through the same exact thing. So if we're going through the same exact fight and I was able to win at my store, then imagine what we can do at your store. We can win your victories. We can win victories for you as well, because we're all going through the same exact thing. It's just in a different font. These corporations are getting away with treating us like our labor doesn't have any dignity, and it does. And we're fed up. That's why you need to join a union, stand up and fight back against these corporations. Share stories out there, because you're not the only one going through it. Some people might think that they're alone, but nobody is alone in this here fight. We are all fighting the same exact fight, and we all have to stand together and show that we really have these powers in numbers, because that's how we get these corporations back, by playing with their money. Since y'all want to play with our money, we're going to go on strike and stop your money for that day, because if none of us are working, You're not going to come in here and flip burgers. You're not going to come in here and make waffles. You're not going to come in here and make sure the stuff get on the truck. You're not going to do none of that. You're going to have to shut down. And that's how we show them that we mean business. We have to make them shut their stores down so that they know we are not playing with y'all anymore. Y'all have played with us for long enough, and it's time for workers to stand up and fight back and show our powers in numbers.
Well, before we let you go, for anyone who may be watching who wants to find out more about USSW, perhaps they're a service worker themselves, where should they go? Where can they look?
So you can find us on all platforms at Raise Up the South, and we have a website, and it's ussw.org, and you can find all information that you need on there.
Naomi Harris, co-founding member of the Union of Southern Service Workers. As always, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Love to have a victory. Love that energy. And yeah, she knows what's up. She knows what's right. And it's true. It's, I love that. It's, workers have leverage. These companies, they can't make the money they make without people doing exactly what she mentioned, flipping the burgers. Like that CEO is not going to go do it.
No, not even
that boardroom of executives are not going to go load things in a warehouse. I know it's true though. And
I'm only laughing because there was that show. I think it was on Fox, maybe NBC for like a few years, like 2 or 3 years. It obviously wasn't called CEO a day because it was not for CEOs, but it was like CEOs for like one day where just had to like do the job of their workers. And it was amazing because none of them could really do the job at all. The one that really sticks with me is Waste Management, the trash company. And the guy from the CEO, I mean, my man was struggling. Like, if he was really like a worker, they would have fired him halfway through. And it's called Secret Boss or something like that. That's what it was. And then, of course, at the end, they would like give the workers like some bonus or whatever as they would reveal. But it really was a telling show because it really showed how a lot of these jobs, I mean, they're hard, but I think a lot of times these people who are well-educated, making all this money, they think, oh, well, how hard can it be? And I'm doing X, I'm doing Y. And then when they really see it, at least the ones who are on this show, you can see it starts to change their mentality because they all look so stupid, totally unable to do any of the jobs that they're paying people for. Undercover boss, that's what it was. Thank you.
Yeah, undercover boss, but it was also just basically PR for CEOs where they'd be like, we really appreciate our workers. And instead of giving you a raise, I'm going to like come try to do your job and show everyone I can't.
Yeah, people would get like vacations or stuff. It'd be these little like petty things. And they'd have these emotional moments, But yeah, good for revealing that these people are not excuse me, who they say they are. And, in this era of public corporations and stock markets, it used to be in the dawn of capitalism, and how true this was, you could take it. They said, there was a premium for owning a business because you took the risk to start the business, of taking a loan, capital formation, blah, blah, blah. But now these CEOs are just very highly paid employees. The investments are coming from people who are investing in the company, either legacy rich people and or more likely now investors in the stock market. So they're really not taking any risk whatsoever. In fact, they're likely to get a golden parachute even when they totally fail, when they meet none of their targets. I mean, you look at a company like JP Morgan, and Jamie Dimon, who's been there for forever. They've had, many, many felony convictions for rampant illegal behavior in almost every single financial market there is. And yet he still getting bigger and bigger pay packages every year. But maybe on Wall Street, that makes sense that those who are breaking the rules and cutting the corners the most are the ones who get remunerated the most. But it really is just completely absurd, the idea that these CEOs work. So I'm glad Naomi made that point. As a lot of union organizers often say, if your boss didn't show up to work today, would you not have to work? Obviously, yes, you would have to work. But if you didn't show up today, would your boss be able to actually run the business? And the answer is no, they would not. And I think that really tells you where the power is.
Yeah, it really does tell you where the power is. And then also there's the point that now you have like major corporations hiring these consulting companies to basically come in and help them figure out how to basically rip off their workers more. Like it literally like these like the consultants from like McKinsey or Deloitte,
PwC, Deloitte,
a Boston Consulting Group will be brought in to just be like, here's how you should deal with human resources, and it's basically just schemes to like get rid of workers, pay some people less, like turn people into contractors so you can take away their salaries. So it's just like you literally have major corporations spending millions of dollars to figure out how to give their workers less money, less compensation for their
and
labor.
9 times out of 10 these consultants actually have no experience in these areas. They just like parachute in these little McKinsey teams. Yeah, it's really sorry. If you're working at McKinsey and you're offended, I'm sorry. That's true. I'm right.
Well, if you're offended, then become a patron of Breakthrough News at the very least, because I know it's, hard to find work these days that pays enough to like, be a homeowner and stuff. So
well, even that you're going to be, potentially in trouble there trying to, make ends meet, even with some of these higher salaries in some of these cities. So anyway, that's my anti-Deloitte, anti-PricewaterhouseCoopers, anti-McKinsey rant. Mayor Pete, we see you.
We just lost all our followers who are like working at Deloitte.
The people who are fixing Canadian bread prices. Anyway.
Jesus Christ.
Let's move forward here in the show. We're in the midst of what I would call a very important anniversary here, and that is the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer, one of the signal events of the civil rights movement, the Southern Freedom Movement of the 1950s and the 1960s. So to get into all of that and more, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Larry Rubin, who is an organizer with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and he was there at the Northern Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. He's also a longtime union organizer and is now on the board of directors of the fantastic SNCC Legacy Project. Larry, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Rania, Eugene, how are you doing?
We're doing well, maintaining, in the heat here, doing the best we can, and very happy to have you here. Really honored. I mean, this is an exciting moment to be, revisiting this history in a time where I think this history is as important as maybe it ever has been since it took place. But let's just start first and foremost with Freedom Summer. I mean, what was it that led you all in SNCC? You'd already been working for a number of years on many civil rights issues to decide to take this step along with other organizations to flood Mississippi in particular to try to register folks to vote?
Well, first of all, before I answer that, I want to give props to Naomi. Hopefully, when we're talking about Freedom Summer, it's not just the past. Hopefully, it was part of the movement that today is leading greater unionization of the South. I don't know whether she mentioned this, but just yesterday, Starbucks workers in Jackson voted for a union. But to answer your question, from 1960 to 64, 3 people had been killed just for voter rights work. Herbert Lee, Medgar Evers, and Lewis Allen. When I say voter rights work, I mean work on changing the power relationships in the South. Blacks had the right to vote, but were prevented from it. So this was a movement to help people exercise the rights they had. 3 people were that we know of were killed. I'm sure more. People were, if you tried to register to vote, you were for sure to lose your job. You could be beaten. If you had a mortgage on your house, it would be taken away. You lose your house. If you were a sharecropper or a tenant farmer, you could be put off the land. This was the movement. People were being killed. And the country wasn't paying much attention. When people were killed, it was more or less, so what? And it was the same attitude, really, at first that was happening all over the South. School children in Birmingham were being hosed for joining the movement. So what? So the idea was that if we bring, and I say we because I was an organizer at the time, I was not a volunteer, but if we bring a whole large number of white volunteers, and on the screen now is Bob Moses, who I am quoting when I say this. If we bring white volunteers particularly affluent students, two things would happen. Number one, they would give protection. These Southern sheriffs and deputies wouldn't dare attack them. And it would give protection to the Black community as well. Number two, if something did happen, the nation would stand up and say, what's going on here? Because these are white students. Bob was wrong about the first. Didn't give much protection. Of course, who's to say what would have happened if the white students were not here? But as it turned out, over 30 churches were burned. Any number of people were beaten. Some more people were killed here in Holly Springs. And I'm saying here in Holly Springs because I'm in Mississippi. And by the way, I don't have all that much sympathy for you with the heat because I'm in Mississippi. But there was a lot of violence. As a matter of fact, probably the fact that there were white and Black workers together in Mississippi elicited some of the violence, but became a target of that. So I think he was right about national attention. It was a major turning point in the civil rights movement, but the violence didn't stop. You could be as white as you want, but if you're from the North and working with Blacks, you were in danger. Mm. But that's why there was one more thing. It happened in 60. It happened in 64. Was the National Convention of the Democratic Party, and starting a year and a half earlier, people in Mississippi organized the Freedom Democratic Party. It was an integrated party. It was meant to show that, first of all, Black people were interested in exercising their rights. Because the racist sons of bitches, they would say, well, our Black people are happy here. They don't want to get involved in this stuff. Mm-hmm. Leave it up to us. And they had the freedom. A lot of people took part. Then they realized, our Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party really represents the people of Mississippi. The regular Democrats, and that was the only party in existence, was just all white. So we are going to demand in 64 that the Democratic Party seat the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party as the representative of the Democratic Party. And Freedom Summer, aside from Freedom Schools and other projects, focused on building the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, on organizing precincts, on getting more people involved to go to Atlantic City and demand to be seated.
So as you reflect back on that period, as you reflect back on that period, I'm just curious, was there ever an attitude of antagonism, even from people who were, didn't, really oppose the idea? They're like, yeah, of course, Black people should be allowed to vote, but maybe you shouldn't, be going down and causing trouble, outside agitators. Was there this attitude that we kind of see today, I guess, towards activism, where you have mayors and governors immediately accuse people of being outside agitators and well, why are you breaking laws? Why are you causing problems? Was there that attitude as well back then?
Well, yes. And there was, especially among white liberals around the nation, that attitude. But it was more dangerous and violent and vicious down here, where the white power structure, the Senator James O. Eastland and Stennis's and Talmadges of the world said, our Black folks are happy here. It's all just these communist outside agitators. And more often than not, they would imply they were Jewish communist outside agitators coming down, stirring things up. If they would only stay out of it, we would solve all our problems. Might take some time, but we'll settle the problems. What they meant was it might take some time among whites. Nobody asked blacks, how much time do you want to remain oppressed?
It's one of these things when we talk about the legacy of these events, Larry, and I thought the point you made at the beginning about how it's not just the past, but it's the future. Even looking at what you all were raising then, I mean, now in the sort of popular imagination, people say, oh, they were there, they were against segregation, they were against racism, which is true, but the context you gave it. I mean, I was looking, for instance, last night at a flyer from the Freedom Vote and the platform of Aaron Henry and Ed King, and, guaranteed wages and freedom from hunger or want. Juxtaposing the economic aspects directly with the democratic aspects. And honestly, that still feels so relevant and so fresh today. So I guess I'm just asking maybe your reaction to that, thinking about this legacy and how important some of those ideas are as we continue to struggle here in 2024.
Today in Mississippi, if you're poor, white or black, and you want to vote, you have to some kind of way get off on voting day. There is no early voting. It's very difficult to do absentee ballots. Today in Mississippi, they have the highest tax on groceries of any other state. Means poor people suffer the most. We have the highest infant mortality rate, the lowest overall mortality rate. We have the largest gap between rich and poor. The minimum wage is as low as you can get. Even though Mississippi has the highest number of black elected officials, not percentage, but number, of any other state, and has the highest percentage of voters of any other state, Mississippi is so strongly gerrymandered that even though most municipalities are majority black and have black elected officials, their vote in general doesn't count because they're gerrymandered in such a way as these pockets of black voters are surrounded by white voters. There's no white elected official statewide. There's only one elected official, Benny Thompson, who has played a very significant role in fighting Trumpism, as you know. But if things were right, out of the 4 congressional districts, at least 2 should be black. And on the other hand, every poll done in Mississippi shows that the majority of Mississippians are for the right to choose, even though Mississippi entered the case that defeated Roe. Every poll shows that Mississippians are for expansion of Medicaid and reopening of rural hospitals, even though the government of Mississippi refuses Medicaid financing. In the last election, the Democratic candidate, Brandon Presley, who ran basically on expansion of Medicaid and ran as an economic populist in the true sense, not in the right-wing sense. He only lost by 23,000 votes. And in part, it was because of the gerrymandering and the difficulty in voting. Of course, the ID laws are ridiculous. But the reason I moved back to Mississippi after I retired from working for the Washington Teachers Union is because I believe that Mississippi has tremendous potential to live up to the fighting spirit that was very evident in the 60s. And a lot of people are still alive, are still there, and their children and grandchildren are still here. Mississippi has changed quite a bit in two things. First of all, legal segregation is no longer. Mm-hmm. No white politician will talk about blacks being inferior, which they used to do. They ran on. Mm. And the social interactions between people are normalized and really evident the best of Southern hospitality. Everybody's very polite and nice, but you scratch right beneath that, then you get to everything I was saying about Mississippi. Mm-hmm. The lowest wages, the highest unemployment, and so forth.
Well, 60 years later, the fight is still on, and Larry, you and many others who were there 60 years ago still with us today as we continue to push forward. We really, really appreciate you being willing to give us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Right on. Thank you so much.
Larry's awesome.
DC legend too, by the way, living in Holly Springs now, but longtime DC labor organizer and many, many different progressive causes. So great to have Larry on. And a great anniversary. We didn't actually get around to asking him about Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, which I told him we would, and I'm sorry we didn't do that now. But the anniversary of their murder is tomorrow. Hopefully, if all goes well, I'll have an article coming out on that people
murdered with the help of the police, we should say. Like
100
local authorities,
more than the help of the police.
KKK, yeah.
Yeah, it's all one thing, really, there in Mississippi at that time. But yeah, Deputy Cecil Price, Sheriff Rainey, the whole nine, a cop from Philadelphia, the Mississippi Highway Patrol, all involved with these other Klansmen. Unbelievable story. So anyway, if you follow my personal social media, hopefully I'll have an article out tomorrow about that. An important thing to remember, 60 years on those three men, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman. Well, excuse me there. We want to keep moving forward to another critically important story, and that is the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And I mean, obviously, there are so many different aspects to this. One, of course, that I think a lot of us have been witnessing from afar has been the total collapse of the healthcare system. I'm understating it by saying this, the extreme challenges that healthcare providers are facing in trying to, provide any, care to people in this terrible carnage. But we are very honored to be joined next by Dr. Umar Burney, who's an orthopedic specialist, and Dr. Syed Ali, who both recently returned from a medical mission in Gaza. Dr. Burney and Dr. Ali, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for having us. Really appreciate that.
No, well, we really appreciate you. It's, where do you even start here? I'd be curious both your thoughts on this, but maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Burney. I guess if for audiences who are watching this from afar, if there's something that they could know about what you experienced in Gaza, what would be at least one of those takeaways you want them to know about what's really happening there on the ground?
Yeah, I think in short, obviously, as you just mentioned, we went into a crisis situation. This is a war. The situation is, of course, extremely unpredictable. We went in under the auspices of the United Nations, a humanitarian convoy that goes in twice a week, or at least it was until the Rafah border was open, which, as you, I'm sure, are aware, the last few weeks when Israel has now officially destroyed the Rafah border at the border of Egypt and the Gaza Strip. So we went in from there, and we were told that we would be part of a United Nations endorsed convoy with safety that comes with that. But of course, we narrowly escaped an attack on the convoy. We were actually supposed to go in on Monday. And that was a convoy that had the World Food Kitchen folks in it that was attacked by the IDF. And unfortunately, we lost 7 humanitarian workers in that. We were supposed to be as part of that convoy. We were delayed and didn't go in until Wednesday. So lucked out for 2 days, and therefore you can still talk to myself and Irfan, but we probably wouldn't have been around in other circumstances. And so, there's no safe area. There's no. So you ask me, what do the people need to know? There is not a safe spot in Gaza today. Even for those of us that are there purely to help others out, that are humanitarians, that are medical professionals, no part of the world sees this kind of atrocity. And as a general rule, medical professionals are protected, not in Gaza.
I mean, it speaks a lot to your bravery for going there. Obviously, both of you have seen the relentless attacks against hospitals, against doctors. Dr. Ali, I'll ask you this. After your experience, can you tell us, obviously the hospital you were working at was still functional on some levels, but we've seen the Israelis go through and essentially dismantle and destroy almost every hospital in Gaza. What was the situation that you were dealing with in terms of the kind of medical care you were able to provide to the people you saw, in addition to the sorts of injuries you were dealing with?
Yes, so like Omar was talking to you guys about, first of all, I would like to thank you both, because like the people of Palestine say that they never complained about anyone while we were there. All they said was, please remember us and please keep telling our stories. So this is what we're doing. I was fortunate enough to be in Gaza before the war in August of 2023. I worked out of Shifa Hospital at that time, which now unfortunately has been bombed and now completely burnt down. This time around, we were at European Gaza Hospital, which is, you can say it's semi-functional. But obviously, there is really, you need to imagine, as you guys were playing that video, there are about 35,000 people staying in that 200-bed hospital. And this is where these guys live. This is the hallway that we are walking through. You have to walk in a single file. These people, that's their livelihood. So imagine what kind of malnutrition, infection, all those things you're encountering. So we go there. Obviously, there's really no infection control, or everyone is malnourished. The people that I have known from August, when I met them now, I could not even recognize them. That's how much weight they have lost. So we did our best in operating under those circumstances, but obviously the outcomes are not optimal because there's infection issues, there are issues with pure nutrition, and then unfortunately we saw so many patients who were who had a cast placed like 4 months ago, but then since that time onward they were displaced from one place to another, and now we are seeing them 4 months later. Like we operated on a young girl who had cerebral palsy. She already was like a special need child, but 4 months ago under the attack, she had some fractures and then someone placed a cast, but then the families were displaced one after another. 4 months later, when we saw her, she was completely contracted. She was in a contracture. We could not even move her neck one side or the other. We did our best, and you see so many kids that you take care of or you operate on, and they have no one to take care of. There was one day when there was bombing and shelling going on, and one of our partners, who's an ENT surgeon, he grabbed a 2-year-old girl from outside who was profusely bleeding from her mouth because of the shelling. We took her to the operating room. We took care of her. When we came out, we had no one to give her to, so we just gave her to one of our partners, and we said, just hold on to her until she wakes up because we have to go on and do the next case. So it's beyond what's anyone's imagination. Me and Umar, we have done many medical missions across the globe. This is not something we have ever encountered. And I think that hopefully journalists like you are allowed at some point to go in so that you guys can witness it and see the real picture.
Mm-hmm. And, Dr. Burney, let me also ask you this, because, obviously the situation right now is so terrible, but the destruction of this medical infrastructure, I just would believe, let's say the genocide ends today, it seems like the impact of this will be significant for some time because so much has been, destroyed that just, even if there's no active conflict, there's still going to have a tremendous effect on public health and the health of people in Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Irfan was just mentioning, he went to Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital was the largest hospital in Gaza prior to this war starting. Now it's essentially, a pile of rubble, burnt rubble. So, you're talking about tertiary care facilities that are non-existent. Even secondary facilities, like we were at European General Hospital, they're running out of fuel. In the operating room, I can speak to the operating room. That no instrumentation sets were complete. They have very basic supplies that they were functioning off of. We were fortunate enough to take some of our supplies with us, but I mean, I can't imagine. It's been 6 weeks since we've been back, and those things have probably run out. That's the news we're getting from the inside. So absolutely, I think they've set them back almost 100 years as far as the infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure, and these people forget about surgeries and surgical OR capability. These people don't have blood pressure medication. They don't have diabetes medication. Like Irfan mentioned, you're talking about malnutrition, which at the heart of it, what will healthcare do if you can't even feed yourself healthy food or or access to safe drinking water? When we were there, we would share one bottle of water between two or three guys, two or three of us healthcare workers, and we were the privileged ones when we were there. So access to drinking water and food is the basic necessity and a basic human right, as we've all experienced, and that's not available to these guys. So absolutely, I think healthcare reconstruction of that healthcare system will take decades, and it'll be a long time before you can make it anything that's recognizable and comparable to any other part of the world.
I think from what the story you were describing, Dr. Ali, I'm reminded of this term that's become quite normal in Gaza of wounded child, no surviving family, which is a pretty regular occurrence at this point, which is horrifying. And to what you're both describing, I mean, these people are completely malnourished, their immune systems are totally shot, and you're dealing with really severe injuries where people are bleeding out. And you both have been on these medical missions you mentioned around the world. And I mean, perhaps, forgive me if this is too much of a leading question, because I'm giving my opinion a little bit here, not a little bit, a lot here. But it just seems to me just utterly shocking that we're still even having a debate about whether or not this is a genocide. You have Israeli leaders openly stating their genocidal intent. They're clearly trying to destroy the medical system as a part of destroying every aspect of what leads to functioning life in Gaza. And I really commend you for your bravery, both of you, for going in and doing this. But has it ever crossed your mind that this is sort of like going and doing a medical mission in the midst of like Holocaust? In terms of what you're seeing here. I mean, again, forgive me if that's too leading, but I just don't know how else to describe this at this point. And you all saw it firsthand. So I'll start with you, Dr. Ali. When I describe it that way, what are your thoughts?
No, I think the way you're describing it, I don't know there is any other better way to describe it, unfortunately. And the other unfortunate thing is that it's hard to say that people still can't see it. There are some people who still can't see it. But once you cross the border and you enter into Gaza and you are with the people of Gaza, we were there in the last 10 days of Ramadan, which are the most blessed days in the Ramadan, and you are with them and you feel very small. Each one of us felt that we are so small compared to those guys. Those guys are so resilient, so generous, and so strong faith that they don't complain. They just truly believe in God, and they just keep on going. And that's what we were wondering, that where do these guys gather their strength? They just gather their strength from their strong faith. But honestly speaking, like one day a guy told us, he said, I know people talk about people of Gaza as some superhumans, but honestly speaking, we are like normal humans as well. We are getting tired. We are getting exhausted. We are losing family members right and left. I don't know we met anyone who had not lost 2 to 3 or 4 family members. But those guys are just there. And just to give you an example, there was one day, me and Umar were walking one part of the hospital to the other part, and there was a lot of bombing and shelling going on. It was time of breaking the fast around Maghrib time, the sunset. And they normally try to do more bombing and shelling at that time because it's more families are together. And there was an Arab lady who stopped us, an old Arab lady. She stopped us and she started saying something in Arabic. We could not understand. And there is like gunpowder smell and everything. So a young boy came. We said, what does she want? So he said that she's saying, we know that you guys came from outside to help us. I just got some food from an aid truck. and I want to give it to you so you can break your fast. So these are the people that you are dealing with. So those guys are standing strong, and those guys have really shown the world what real strength and resilience is. And I hope rest of the world sees it. And I hope independent journalists like you are allowed some time to go in and see with your own eyes, and then the world can decide whether it's genocide or not.
I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, honestly, I mean, like you said, I think Irfan summed it up perfectly. I think, frankly, the job of the journalists, and I hope and pray that more media personnel like yourselves address this issue and bring it to the forefront. And kudos to you guys for doing that. I'll be honest with you, we're medical professionals, we're humanitarians. We want to be able to get back in there. And so for us, we remain neutral because, to be honest with you, our best bet to get back in there is to put our own personal opinions aside and to continue to put our heads down and continue to work for anybody. And I say this openly, I don't discriminate. Our Hippocratic Oath does not allow us to discriminate against any race, gender, identity of any sort. We're there. Our eyes have seen it. We have our own personal beliefs. But we've shared some of those with you, but our job is to tell you what we saw with our own eyes. And obviously we're very accurate as to what you're saying. But we want to get back in there, and we want to be able to help people. And unfortunately, as you know, some of the stuff that comes out on the media, you get tagged and then you don't get to be a member of future medical missions.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, well, I do have one thing I want to ask real quick. Just I'm curious if when it comes to other medical missions that you've gone on before, in other disaster zones, war zones, what was different about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Irfan said, you can't compare this to anything we've ever experienced. I mean, I've been doing medical missions for the last 20 plus years, and similarly, Irfan's been all over the world. And the fact that the uncertainty of a war zone and the one-sided nature of the constant attack was nothing like we've ever seen. And the depth or degree of human suffering, listen, you can go to the most impoverished parts of the world and you're not going to see the degree of human suffering that we experienced. It is very difficult to keep ourselves composed. Like I said earlier, it's been about 5 or 6 weeks since we've been back, and just the pictures that the videos running, just talking about it again today makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It was a very, very difficult situation to see human beings suffering to this extent. And I tell you, suffering is in all forms and formats, whether it was the pains of explosive injuries to their extremities. We saw kids that had lost both of their arms, to just a child who's living in a hospital for the last 3 to 4 months, because as Irfan said, there's 35,000 displaced individuals living inside the hospital because that is the only safe zone that they can find, or quote unquote safe area they can find. Suffering at all extents. So, when you ask me, does it compare to anything else? We've seen impoverished people all over the world, but nothing to this magnitude.
Yeah. So I think just like Umar was saying, that you go to some peripheral areas of Africa, you are going to see a lot of poverty, a lot of malnutrition, a lot of water crisis. But those guys still have semi-functional working place. They're not getting bombed or shelled all the time. Then you go to a disaster area like an earthquake. All right, they may have their infrastructure destroyed, but they have food and water. But over here in Gaza, we felt that you have all the catastrophes combined into one area, and then you multiply it 100 times. There is food issue, there is water issue, there is security issue, there is family displaced. Even like the workers, the local guys who are working with us, sometimes they, because we'll try to have dinner together, and we asked the guy, we said, okay, we'll have dinner again together tomorrow, so here's the money. He said, no, I can't take your money because I don't know if I'm going to come to work tomorrow. What if I get murdered tonight? That's the kind of life these guys are living day in and day out. And at this point, even like the guys who used to be the head of the department of orthopedic or head of department of anesthesia, those guys are living on the streets and they have nothing. So everyone has lost everything.
Well, I have to say, we're tremendously grateful to you. I think the world is grateful to you for being able to, being willing to take the risk to go in and perform these critical duties. And we're super grateful that you all both, Dr. Burney and Dr. Ali, were willing to give us some of your very precious time here, joining us on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for having us. Appreciate that.
Absolutely heroic. I gotta say, knowing like they went in there knowing that Israel's attacking aid workers, attacking doctors, doesn't care if you're an international, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you have a passport from, one of the wealthy countries that supports Israel, they will still kill you. People doing that are doing really like heroic work. And yeah, that's some pretty harrowing stuff they just described.
Yeah. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine it. I really can't. But yeah, fantastic that they were, willing to take this on and so important. So, obviously keep spreading these stories around, keep talking about it. Don't stop talking about it, I think is the most critical factor, that you really, really can remember, I think, and people from Gaza keep saying it. Well, thanks again to the two doctors. Thanks to all of our guests who joined today. This is going to bring us to the close here, Rania. Before we go, are there things you'd like to remind our viewers about?
Yes, I want to remind our viewers first and foremost to make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. And for those who are able to, you can, for as little as $5 a month, become a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. It can get you access to exclusive content and merch. But more importantly, it can help support our sustainability and our growth as an independent media outlet that is not tied to the war machine like all the rest of the corporate media is, so that we can bring you the reality of what's happening around the world and call a genocide a genocide.
Yeah, indeed, which should be basic, but, sadly, it's not basic whatsoever. But yes, anyone who can donate, please do. Thanks to everyone who's already donating. Thanks again to all of our guests who joined from all around the world, some of them quite late, in fact, on their side of things. And of course, big thanks to all of you viewers for joining us, whether you're watching here on YouTube or on Free Speech TV, who we want to give a special shout out to for everyone watching us and checking us out there. But for myself and for Rania and the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.